It was sort of I won't try to imitate it, a chortle, sort of, and he'd start laughing really heartily, kind of from the belly. But you didn't know it was a joke until the very end. So, so that photo it kind of captures him. He's probably thinking something wry and quizzical. But I'll say one more thing here, because it has been a long morning. Everybody talked about Ken's principles and Ken mentoring, and Ken had a lot of very wise things to say. And he, when I decided I was going to run, he told me all his wise things, just like he told everybody else. But I'm not going to pretend like I followed his advice. He told me these things, and I said, yeah, right. He gave me his little list. I stuck it in my drawer. I thought, no, we can't actually work that way. You're just the same idealist that led you to represent these people who had occupied a congressman's office to protest the war in Central America. I think it was Mark Vanderhout. I said, I just thought, oh, he's just impossibly idealistic. He's impossibly naive. I'm not going to be able to serve that way. So I didn't take his advice for the most part. But he was right. He truly was. And he was one of those people who really just thought beyond the day-to-day. He was a strategist, and he was a tactician. But the strategist in him was thinking to a time, that I don't think we'll see for a long time, when we do get money out of politics and when people really do the right thing because it's the right thing. So it's nice to be back here looking at my friends. I wish it were different circumstances. And as I've sat here all morning, I've been thinking, the only time I'm going to get to come back and talk with you is for sad occasions like this. But I'm happy to be able to talk about my friend Ken. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Representative Levy. It's a pleasure to have you back. Representative McCloskey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and members, and Ken's family. I truly appreciate the opportunity to speak about Ken's remarkable life. It's somber moments like this when I realize that 63 years is just far too short. It's something that my mother always used to say to me, is that tomorrow is promised to no one. Yesterday's the past. What's done is done. And today is a gift. It's why it's called the present. And Ken lived his life that way. He had so much zest for life. It was about the issues. That was his medium for expressing his joy for life. But he also had a very dry, wicked sense of humor. When I first got elected in 2008 in District 9, which is southeast Denver, he was doing part of the orientation, and he came up to me with a very serious face, and he said, Joe, no, he goes, Representative McCloskey-elect, you have to know, you're the first Gentile in 24 years to represent southeast Denver. Please do us proud. And I thought he was joking at first, and then I realized, okay, he really is joking. But he loved to put you on your heels. But the thing that keeps resonating with Ken is his passion. I wore a yellow and blue tie today because I'm also from the Ann Arbor, Michigan area. He was a diehard University of Michigan Wolverines fan. But more importantly, he had a passion for this system, this republic, this democratic form of governance that he really believed was sacred. He really believed there was something sacred between constituents and his or her elected official, that when you truly listened, knocked on doors, hosted town hall meetings, got legislation inspired by a constituent, that's when true representative democracy flourished. And he believed it more than any legislator I've ever met. The other second thing about Ken that sticks out is his camaraderie. I served here for 4 years, and it's one of the first times I've been back. And he said something in orientation that really stuck with me. He goes, you are going to like the people on the other side of the political aisle, sometimes more than your own party. And some of you may laugh, but one of my favorite people is Representative Waller. I miss him greatly. I miss I know. I miss the way we would chide each other. And I also miss the way we would have it, as the old proverb said, one iron sharpens another iron to produce a better product or service, or in this case, a piece of legislation. And the last thing I'll say about Ken is that he reminds me of an old prophet Micah. When Micah asked God, what does the Lord require of thee? It's to seek justice It's to love mercy, and it's to walk humbly with thy God. To seek justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God. Of all the things, Ken sought justice for the marginalized. He sought justice for the people that had no voice. He sought justice for the people that did not have a seat at the table of economic power. That story about the woman who he stopped the committee for just symbolizes Ken. My heart goes out to his family. 63 years is way too short. Thank you for the chance to speak about Ken Gordon.
Representative McGeehan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I look at that picture, and as Representative Levy said, Ken is in the room, totally. I first met Ken when he was actually I met him before then, but when he was campaigning for the House. And I want to tell you that the words that Speaker Romanoff read are the words that Ken lived by. He got several of us to walk with him, did he not, Ken Smith? And there was this garage at Helen and Ken's house, and the garage door opened, and there was this huge Xerox machine. I said, "Oh my God, Ken, where did you get that?" "Oh, I closed my law practice. I kept it in case we needed it for the campaigns." Well, my gosh, it got used and used and used, and that driveway was a huge center for walks. But Ken walked from dawn until dark. And he expected, when you were walking for him, to walk from dawn until dark as well. And you know the no soliciting sign? Oh, no. You ring that doorbell, because that is a door that you would have missed otherwise. And you walked every house because every house was his constituent. So, he gets elected, and suddenly I'm being asked to drop this book at the end of session. And I think you had something to do with that, writing it up. Ken believed that democracy meant keeping your constituents informed. And he printed a book at the end of every session. I think it got bigger over the years, that talked about everything that happened during the legislative session. And so if you were a volunteer for Ken, that meant that you walked at the end of session and you helped drop the book. At least you didn't have to ring the no solicitation doorbells. But you did have to leave that at every door. And so 94 comes around and Ken's running again. And he goes, "Are you going to walk with me?" I said, "Ken, you won by like 62, 64%. That doesn't mean I'm going to win again." So we walk again. And he wins by 70% the second election. And on the third election, "Are you going to walk with me?" "Well, Ken, there are other people running. You won by 70%. That doesn't mean I'm going to win again." And I sometimes called Ken Eeyore because he always thought that he was going to not win again. And as we know, he did remarkably well. But he lived by the words that he wrote. And continued, and I had a measly attempt, but what Ken taught me was that at the end of every session, your constituents need to know what you've done or what other members have done. And it's a fantastic bit of information that you can give your constituents. The other thing that hasn't been talked about, that is a remarkable thing that happened in Colorado, is what Ken and Helen did together. And that is changing the way we view children in this state. And I may get a little teary, because I always do when I get up here. But children are not chattel to be divided up. They are their own person. We have Ken and Helen to thank them. So it's a remarkable change that we have in Colorado in terms of child custody. So thank you, Ken. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Betty, and all of the family.
Representative or Senator, I don't know which one you want to be called. I'll call you by the better one. Representative Weissman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be brief. Ken was a majority leader. I was a majority leader. I know the majority leaders have been looking at the clock and looking at the calendar all morning long and not pleased. Ken really was an intellectual powerhouse. He and I both ran and won in the same year in 1992. Me for the Senate, he for the House. He totally drank the Kool-Aid with the no PAC money pledge. when I was running, and it was easier for me because I wasn't supposed to win, when I was running, put limits on what people in PACs could give and what I could spend. So we had this conversation periodically during the elections, although not that often, about money and politics, about his real passion. He called me one time, and he wasn't big on small talk, as you could tell, and I figured out a few weeks ago if he would have been when he was visiting his daughter, who happens to live around the corner, and I just figured that out a few weeks ago as I was playing waiter. He would have come down the street and visited. He was never big on small talk, but he calls me one time out of the blue during the election asking about a check that one of his relatives in Michigan was going to bring. It was going to give him. It was supposed to be a rather large check. And he was trying to figure out whether that was okay to take or not. And I said, well, Ken, you know, I limited contributions to, I can't even remember what it was like $500 or $200. It was before the voters did it for us. I said, I wouldn't take that kind of contribution that big, but you're certainly, you know, welcome to if you choose to. You know, it could create a conflict. And his conclusion was, well, he's never going to want anything from me. And that was really the end of the conversation. You know, there was no more talking about it, no more doing it. I think he was that professor just trying to ask the question to get himself where he already was. And it was fine. I think the check ended up being smaller, but still good. The same thing happened when, you know, it was talked about him walking the state for referendum C and D. He went by my district walking. And he had called me real quick. He said, listen, I'll be walking by your district. Will you join me? And I said, well, you know, Ken, I don't support Representative D. I think D is a mistake. I support Representative C. I don't know how I can do that when you're out there doing both. He said, oh, okay, and that was the end of the conversation. Boom. It was one of those things where he knew where he was, he'd figured out where he was, and there was no reason to do the small talk in between. I quite frankly appreciated that in him. When I was over in the Senate and he was over here in the House, yeah, we were both on state affairs. We had probably the most 30-second conversations in the hallway that you could have, but they got to the point. I was on state affairs in the Senate. I told him what was coming to him in the House. He was on state affairs in the House. He told me what was coming in the Senate. We were both wildly in the minority. I mean, there was neither of us would have ever expected in our lifetime that we could ever be in the majority. We were both wildly in the minority, but we wanted, so we didn't have to talk about what bad was coming because there was nothing bad coming. It was there to die. It was bad from our perspective that they were going to pass and we were going to vote no. And it was a 30-second, this is coming. Oh, okay, thank you. This is coming to you. Boom, done. He had an incredible grasp of this place and his position in it and what it meant, not for him, but for the state of Colorado. He knew, I believe, as I knew when I walked in the building, that the tenets of this building, that the rules of the building, the procedure of the building are much more important than he was, that I was. And he lived that when he was minority leader, he lived that when he was majority leader, and he lived that throughout in the committees. He went about his business in an orderly, business-like, intellectual fashion, which, as you could tell from this morning, and those of you that were in the service in the synagogue could tell, drew people in. Ken owned his district like nobody else because he served his district like nobody else. That he put them first, he put this place first. Ken was an amazing politician in the best sense of the word. He would have been an amazing Secretary of State. And Ken and his, the measure of a person really 63 years or 62 years, whatever it was, isn't when you die, it's what you did when you were alive. And the stuff that Ken did when he was alive and the testimonies today and the testimonies in the service at the synagogue are incredible and something that really proves out the life that he lived. Ken is missed by me today, missed by many today, but he will be remembered tomorrow. Thank you all very much for allowing us to, as Grossman said, indulge ourselves, and thanks for allowing the morning to be used like this, Mr. and Mrs. Majority Leader.
The House will come back to order. Representative Court, do you have any final?
I just want to thank everyone for your patience and for your beautiful, beautiful words about a wonderful, wonderful former colleague. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, the question for the House is the passage of Senate Joint Memorial 1. Mr. Kohler, please open the machine and members proceed to vote.
Do I have to go vote? As the sponsor? I need to go vote. Shoot. Where's Pabon?
Representative Pabon excused. Close the machine. With 63 aye votes, 0 no votes, 2 excused, and 0 absent, Senate Joint Memorial 1 is passed. Representative Court.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I move the current roll call of the House be added as co-sponsors.
Seeing no objection, the current roll call is made the co-sponsors of SJM 1. Representative Court for introductions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to take a moment to thank the family and friends who joined us today. Certainly his son Ben, his daughter Wendy, and his former wife Helen Shreve. We appreciate your being here.
Representative Court.
Thank you. I also want to acknowledge his longtime companion, Betty Lehman, and his longtime friend, whom many of you heard speak at the memorial at the synagogue, Mark Vanderhout.
The House will stand in a brief recess for us to greet our guests and also for the Senate to go back to their chamber. We'll be back in a few minutes. The House is in recess. I think.
There are places I remember all my life, though some have changed.
Brian, are we going to do any third?
Forever, not for better. Some have gone and some remain. All these places have memories. Can recall some are dead and some are living. My life, I've loved them all. But of all these friends and lovers, there is no one compares with you. These memories stand beneath, and I think of love, think new. Okay. Before, no, I'll often stop and think about them. My life, I want you more. I know I'll never lose affection for people and things that went before. I I know I'll often stop and think about them. I've loved you more.
The House will come back to order. Announcements and introductions. I know a couple of the chairmen needed to make announcements. Maybe I'm wrong. Okay. Representative Kagan, did you need an announcement? Did you need to announce something about your committee? Representative Kagan.
Members of the House Judiciary Committee and those interested in rental cars and insurance companies and rates of compensation, House Bill 1187 was to be heard this afternoon for action only. However, at the request of the sponsor, House Bill 1187 has been postponed, and we will deal with it at a later date.
Representative Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the House Agriculture, Livestock, and Natural Resources Committee, I do have an important announcement. It's not in the calendar, but tomorrow on adjournment we will hear House Bill 1218, but don't get all excited and go out and read the bill. At the request of the sponsor, which is myself, I will ask that that bill be postponed indefinitely. So just make sure, since we didn't get it in time to get on the calendar, we will meet briefly on adjournment tomorrow. And also we have our 7:30 meeting with the Senate Ag Committee, and we will meet with the Water Quality Control Commission. So please be there at 7:30 tomorrow.
Any further announcements or introductions? Seeing none, the House will be in recess. Members, you do not need to return. We will see you back here tomorrow, 9 a.m. Thank you for your patience and your attention this morning.